there's a wonderful emerging trend called an AND. I don't know if you've heard about it, called Allow a Natural Death. That just says write it all down and let nature just take its course. You don't have to get the medicines and the care and everything else. Just let this occur because it's going to occur, and you are in control of what that's going to look like. I think you should have the ability to say, you know what, I've had all the fun I can stand here, and I'm just not going to take any more of the medicines. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to just peacefully go.
Welcome to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. If you ever asked, how do I protect myself and those I love if something unexpected happened to me? You're in the right place. I'm your host, Niki Weiss, and together we'll explore how to protect yourself in a world where both your physical and digital legacy leave a lasting impact. And welcome back to another episode of the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. Today, my guest, it's a professor, Professor Donaldson. I don't know if we need to be more official, but the reason, thank you for being here. And how does a finance professor find themselves in the death space?
Well, Nikki, the way you find yourself in that is you or someone you know is going to die, for absolute 100% certainty. And that's how I got here. Is my parents got me involved, and I realized early on I didn't know anything about death because in America we don't talk about it. And as I started exploring, I was shocked and appalled that nobody talked about it. And it just was the oddest thing to me that here was an experience 100% of us are going to share, and yet we don't talk about it. It just didn't make any sense to me at all as a lifelong learner and an academic and businessman who tried to figure out why things work the way they do.
Well, I mean, fascinating, right? So it wasn't until your parents, and you could talk more about the journey that you went through with your parents, that you went from
Yeah,
professorhood to probably full-on caregiver for your parents and looking at life at a very different way. So finance, what's your background?
yes. Well, actually, I'm an engineer by training, and part of the real endearment is my father got very sick and when I was a very young age, and I took over his two companies for him. So at age 26, I was a CEO of two companies, and that got me involved in finance and management and running companies forever. And then I sold my last company and got involved in academia full time and love helping young people find their way. But that's the sidebar. But it also brings the question, well, what does this guy know about death or anatomy or medicine or anything like that? And the story is my parents named me and my brother Alec executors of their estate, and they were among the population that actually has done a lot of the things you're supposed to do. Having a do not resuscitate and an advance directive and a will, and they'd thought it all out, and we thought we were done. We went up and met with the attorneys and signed it all, but then as I started talking to them about how this was going to progress, you could see they'd done the legal side of it, but they hadn't thought at all about the emotional and what I call the caregiving and what I call the biographical side. And it became very clear to me, wow, that's going to be the much harder stuff to deal with. And so that got me interested, and I started poking on them and asking them, and they just completely avoided having those discussions. I write about it in the book. It actually became funny because I would start asking them questions, and they'd say, well, what are you trying to kill us? And I said, well, if you don't start answering these questions, I just might do that. Right? Let's get on with it. But the fact that they had just avoided it was so odd to me. And so then I went talking to folks that I knew and death doulas and hospice care workers and doctors to say, what's going on here? And they all said, everyone should talk about this. No one does, and you're odd as hell because nobody goes on a journey to learn this stuff and understand it. It just didn't make any sense to me.
Well, you and I, we're in the same boat, right? I mean, I am at the top of the mountain screaming like, why aren't we planning? right? And the
Right.
fact that you're,
And everybody I talked to said, "Oh, by the way, you should write a book. You should get them
nope.
doing this."
So
So I
here's your
did.
book.
So I did.
I don't know if
Exactly.
it's showing up forward or backward, but so you wrote a book as an academician. So it became an academic exercise in writing. Did you write it before or after your parents? Yeah.
After, because again, as I went around, people just said, "Well, not many people talk about this stuff, and you should do this." And I'd written a management book before, and my publisher, I told him about the idea. And he's like, "That would be terrific. We should do that." And we had a whole team assembled. Again, grief specialists and doctors and hospice care workers and you name it. And we worked on it extensively and researched the background. What's really interesting is once I wrote the story, we got the team together and everybody came to the same conclusion and said, don't put any of that other stuff in. There's plenty of how-to guides to how to do this. Just go out with the emotional appeal to and tell the story. And as you saw, it's small. You can get it in Charlotte, and by the time you're in Chicago, you've finished it because people just won't approach the topic if you give them a 400-page tome with lots of medical terms and legal terms, et cetera.
So for those that that are listening to the podcast here, the name of your book is Estimated Time of Departure, and you wrote how
Yes.
to talk to my parents. Oh, how I talk to my parents about death, and you called it a love story.
Yeah, yes. And that was intentional. We wanted to be a little bit playing with it, and that these are hard discussions. My father was an aeronautical engineer and a pilot, so this notion of having to figure out your departure. I write about it. A pilot has to file a flight plan and to tell you when you're leaving and what the route's going to be and how many bags you're taking, how many people you're taking, what's the weight, etc. All of the planning that you're trying to get people to do and I'm trying to get people to do, a pilot has to do that. And it just struck me as, wow, here's a guy who knows that you should do all this for any departure, and yet we're not talking about it at all. We're not having any of those discussions. It was just, as I say, and then it became this really fun repartee and comedy. I'd come in and my parents would be like, so when are you going to start talking about, when we're dying? And I said, well, whatever you want to. And so
Reminds me,
we were,
and your book reminds me a little bit of Mitch Albom's book,
mhm,
Tuesdays with
yes,
Maury, and his,
yep,
he's got 7 or 8 books out there, maybe more than that, but all of them around the same theme,
mhm.
and it's empowering, and yet for your parents to still sit back and say, you're, why are you trying to kill us off? Like my life,
Right.
no, your life's not over. All the more reason, right?
Mhm.
We want to plan and not have these surprises.
Yes.
So they were, even to the end, they were resistant.
No, no, that's just it. We got started early. I was in my 40s and they were in their 60s. And that's what was so lucky, Nikki, because, and I write about it in the book, it just, people wait too long. And once you get into extremis or you're in the ER or you're in an institution or you're in failing mental or
Mhm.
physical health, that's the worst time to start these discussions. So we were lucky that there was nothing impending, and part of that was why I think my parents thought they could just ignore it, like so many Americans. Just, oh well, we don't have to worry about that now. No, you want to talk about it. So once we broke through the fun and started having the discussions, it just was a normal course of events in planning for their lives and their end of life. And that just opened up everything. And that's why I talk about it being such a liberating, cathartic process that just made it all the more rich. And everyone knew what was going to happen when it came. It was just, there was no second guessing, there was no pointing fingers. It was all, okay, this feels right. We're ready. And that you read about a good death, that's what it's all about.
And for your parents, again, they focused on the legal, but they didn't look at necessarily all the financials, right? And when
No, they did the
even
financials,
like
but what
even
they
like that
did,
end of life, because I'm just spoke to my cousin last night who was telling me how you know her mother, her 88-year-old mother, is now, they have to move out of the big house and get care, and what does that care look like, and $8,000 a month, like even those
mhm,
end of like those long-term care, your parents had that all worked out as well, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid.
absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
yep. And so they did a great job there, and they got to the point where they both said, you know what, if we get to a point in our lives where it's not worth extending it, we don't want to do that. We don't want to, we don't want to spend any of the treasure that we've built up to maintain a life that's not worth living. And we described what that would look like. And it's so funny, in my interviews with people, you ask them what they want a good death to be, and they'll describe it, and then you tell them how most people end up, and they don't want that at all, but yet they don't have the conversations.
So let's have that conversation, right?
Hmm.
Say, I mean, how does that, what are those questions that you ask?
Oh, well, just where do you want to be when this occurs, and who do you want to have around you, and can you afford to have those discussions, and that what you want around you, and what are you willing to trade off? Okay, you want to stay in your home. Do you want strangers coming in and doing the caregiving? Are you okay with that? Because all of us live out of town or whatever. You just have to have those hard discussions that are very frank, but are going to affect the care and the quality of life.
And again, my cousin and I were just talking about that. It's amazing how, and as a finance professor, we can talk a little bit about the finance piece,
Yeah.
which is that people spend a lifetime building a nest egg,
Hmm.
and then yes, we're living longer, we're also dying longer.
Right.
So that nest egg you can build up and burn through in the last 3 to 5 years of your life.
Yes. Well, and that's the paradox is here we in America have this great, aging system and healthcare system, um, but we think that's solves the problem, but it makes it much more complex and much more challenging. If you go to other nations, my nephew was living in Africa with the Peace Corps at the time. A lot of this was going on. I was writing about it, and we had these very profound discussions. People are dying in my village every day, but there is no healthcare system. There's no retirement home you can go to. So you just know that they're going to pass away, and it's there's a wonderful emerging trend called an AND. I don't know if you've heard about it, called allow a natural death. That just says write it all down and let nature just take its course. You don't have to get the medicines and the care and everything else. Just let this occur because it's going to occur, and you are in control of what that's going to look like.
AND.
AND.
AND. So instead of
It's called an allow a natural
allow it,
death,
and
and
so
it's
instead of an NDA, which is
yeah,
now it's an AND. So allow a natural death. And for some people, again, having had these hard conversations, and when I say to them, I know, yes, your 90-something-year-old beloved has a UTI, urinary tract infection.
right,
Do you really want to medicate?
right,
I mean, pneumonia, right? That's another
yep.
natural allowed.
They used to call pneumonia the old man's friend or the old people's friend because it took you out of your misery of not being able to get around or whatever. And we just have to have those intelligent discussions. I write about it in the book. Nikki, I remember just so profoundly, just like it was yesterday, sitting in the hospital room with my mother after the stroke, and all of the medical things were manageable, right? And as the doctor read them off and said, we can do, speech therapy and physical therapy, and you could just see she was just completely checked out because we'd had all these discussions, and she just looked right at him when he said, "Do you want me to write these?" She said, "No, I'm done. I've had all the fun I can stand. I just want to go back to my apartment. I'm getting taking all of the medicines off. I'm just going to go into hospice and say goodbye." And she was so resolute and so pure, and all of us knew that. So we weren't arguing about it. Oh no, Mom, we need one more minute with you. We need another month. It was so calm and so human. It was just fantastic.
Have you done any studies about the economics around extending people's lives? Because they've had
Oh,
that.
it's
The reason I'm saying it, not to put the U.S. focused medical system on, but I've had conversations with, consulting clients where they have
Hmm.
an elderly parent in a long-term care facility. The parent has long-term Alzheimer's, dementia, memory care. Like there is no quality of life. I mean, I'm going through there
Hmm.
like that with my father-in-law, but my sister-in-law won't put him on hospice, um, and keeps medicating him because he keeps getting UTIs. He's almost 96. He's had COVID
Hmm.
in a nursing home twice, and yet, we're at the point right now where these are her. We can live with it, but she can't.
Right.
So, what are the economics around that? Like for medical
They're
professionals to extend someone's life, even knowing there is no quality.
they're terrible, and I work very closely here at Eastern Virginia Medical School with a wonderful doctor, palliative care specialist Michael Lane, and several other people in the aged community. Um, and the numbers are terrifying. I think it's something like 18% or 20% of all of the funds of Medicare get spent in the last weeks
Oh,
of life, and they don't extend care. And there's not only the economic, but there is a real challenge for doctors who have this. Um, they're torn because they know that extending this life really isn't going to make the patient's life any better. All it's going to do is extend the duration. And so there's this moral dilemma that doctors are facing, and um, but the system is set up to do that. And if you don't have these conversations in advance, and you don't have an A&D and an NDR and all the things that you should have in place, who's going to make those decisions for you? Well, it's going to be your sister who doesn't want to say goodbye to mom and dad. It's going to be your doctor. It's going to be the caregiver. But if you had a piece of paper that said very clearly, I do not want any of this, it changes everything. This is what mom said. We had these discussions. We have to follow her will. And then you take that beyond. Again, as a finance professor, I think the number is something like only about 60% of Americans have not saved enough money for retirement. They're not going to be able to live and just pay their normal bills, much less, an extensive medical bill. So we've got very, very serious challenges systemically that we're all facing.
and again, is this like? Um, I'm gonna say, let's just focus on the United States, right? Because you made that comparison, the United States versus an African country, where they're
Mhm.
more community based, where medical systems are not as sophisticated, perhaps, or accessible or available. So, is that we as a society have just conditioned ourselves to think that we can live above and beyond means?
I think so. I think it's a cultural phenomenon that we just haven't talked about and faced these very hard issues. If you look at Congress, they know we can't afford um, the Medicare and Medicaid that we have today, and it's going to get worse. We have this graying, what do they
The
call it,
silver
the silver
tsunami.
tsunami. Yeah, and all the predictions are there. We just don't want to deal with it. And that's not just this topic. We human beings, we just don't like to face the sort of bad prospects. And I've always been one to believe that that future is going to arrive whether you want it to or not, whether you like it or not. So you better start preparing for
But how do we change this mindset? I mean, when you speak to people, do you talk? So I find it. Let me see. You're as a professor, your students are in their 20s,
it.
maybe
Hmm.
if you're doing graduate students.
18 to 20, yeah, or
So I find it easier talking to 20, 30-year olds than I do 70, 80-year olds.
oh yes,
What's that
absolutely.
about?
And I think generationally they are just more open. I also think they don't have the fear looming that says this is going to happen to them. I think they just it's not a it's not an existential threat to them, so they just can explore it. Versus, I think the older generations that we're dealing with, that your parents and my parents were a part of, I think you didn't talk about these things and you didn't reveal this anyway. And so I just think culturally we never got comfortable talking about it. That's what I'd love to change. Is hoping to get estimated time of departure turned into a feature length film and and a set of documentaries to get people to have these discussions so that we change the arc. And when we get to another generation, people are just regularly having these discussions, in certain communities, in Switzerland and other places in Europe. You can actually have those discussions. You can talk about what you want at end of life, and you can go somewhere and say, you know what, I'm denying care and I'm going to check out. You own your life and your decision. No one gave you permit. You didn't have anybody's permission. Somebody brought you into the world, but you actually can control how you live and when you
The
live.
empowerment of it. And
And
again, I don't know when we
yes,
lost that.
no,
Was it just, again, I think about 100 years ago,
mhm.
right? There were no
Yeah, and
funeral homes, right?
no, exactly. And you just, if you go back and read the ancient um, traditions, the American Indians, Africans and other
Indigenous.
tribal traditions, when your time came, I call it the three C's. When you couldn't communicate with the tribe, you know, contribute to the tribe and commute with the tribe, you were done. You just went off and exposed yourself, and that was it. And that's what my brother or my nephew said is, these people get to the point where, okay, there's nothing I can do. I'm going to my hut, and it's over because none of this. I can't do any of the things that a human should be able to do. And at that point, what's the
Oh,
point?
now we're stepping into like that existential,
Oh yeah,
you know,
no. And this gets
it
this
gets
gets very
messy.
hard. And people say, "Oh, well, then now the government's going to decide." I've had people tell me, "Oh, you just want the government to be able to tell you that I can kill your mom and dad."
Or you have a
No,
disability, like, what is it?
right,
But people who can't walk, can't talk, can't hear, like now
right.
we're putting
And
value on
I have
whether
people say, "Oh,
quality of life.
you're arguing for suicide," and that's why I changed the term to "I decide." Right? If you're at the end of your life and you're miserable, I think you should have the ability to say, "You know what? I've had all the fun I can stand here, and I'm just not going to take any more of the medicines. I'm not going to do anything. I'm gonna just peacefully go." And
It's a choice. So then there's two sides of it, right? There's this personal, because, and I've heard both sides of the story where the person says, I'm done,
mhm.
and they're ready, but the family's not ready.
And that's why you have to have the conversations because I've saw terrible um, renderings of families that were just torn apart by this. The daughter who didn't really know anything flies in at the last minute and says, "Oh no, take all put the tubes in
Save
and
her
do
no
the
matter what.
operation." Right, exactly. And now the two sisters don't speak to one another because of the way it all ended. And don't get me started on the bill.
Oh, the
And
caregiving piece.
I interviewed a doctor who told me about a patient who basically closed the door and said, "Doctor, can you talk to my children because I'm done, but they just want to keep doing stuff to me." And he said, "You go talk to them." And the doctor was like, "Sorry, you got to have those conversations."
Yeah.
And that's why what I saw was the how this empowered my parents, and I think one of the things we fear is a loss of control. And having this conversation, my parents were absolutely in control, and you could just see it come over them. All right, I'm in control of what's going to happen. I've told all of my children, I've told everybody who wants to listen, my doctors, this is where we are. I'm back in control of this.
So the population that you really focused on, this was more seniors. This is, I mean, were you in hospice, like young terminally ill people, or what was your sample population when you did the study?
All over. We talked to, people who were going through this themselves, younger family members who hadn't even thought about it and just to get their experience. We talked to lots and lots of people just to try to get a sense for it. And lots of people throughout the healthcare system, as I say, death doulas and hospice workers. And you talked to a number of people who ran retirement homes and were
Did
caregivers.
you step in with any legislative, like death with dignity, any of those?
Yes, talked
Share.
to a
Yeah.
number of
So for
them.
people that don't know, and maybe we can do a little bit of educational moment here, death with dignity is the laws in the United States that allow
Hmm.
for what we call medical aid in dying, right? So that you
Right.
can, if you have 6 months or less, there are certain states. More are coming online. I
Hmm.
think it's February of 2026. I think recently
Yep.
Illinois was the last one,
Hmm.
right? So
Yep.
what information and where do you see this law in Canada? Where do you see this law going? I know in Canada it's throughout the entire all province. Where do you
Right.
think it's going to go for the United States?
You know, I think there's a very real battle brewing between those, fundamentalists who don't want any of this to come. But I think it's just more and more people are realizing the human side of it is that, hey, this is a choice I get to make, not my doctors, not someone else. So I want that freedom. I want that right to be able to do it. So I'm all for it. But I will tell you, I have been shouted down and gave a talk about my book. And, I had a man come up to me and say, I was a godless sinner and I
Oof.
should burn in hell because of what I'm saying. What, and what was extraordinary is I said, well, what's your plan? He said, I can't make this plan. Only the Lord can make my plan for me. And I said, well, that's your belief.
Right.
Write that down. Tell your family. And right about then, his son tapped him on the shoulder and said, Dad, we should talk. So I think that people want to talk about it. Going back to the younger generations, they haven't made up their mind on it. So let's get them exposed to it. Let's get them talking about it and see where it
Well, let
goes.
me drop one on you. I just came back from a Web3 conference, ETH Denver, where I spent the week with people who are very much involved with blockchain and
Hmm.
Web3 and cryptocurrency, NFTs. So tech bros, basically, tech babes, tech bros. So I was definitely a solo promoter out there introducing to the concepts of death tech and lots of fascinating conversations. But it was amazing how many of them just believed, and again, maybe because they're in technology and AI and they think that AI is going to allow them to live forever, and all of them are biohacking.
Hmm.
I get it,
Hmm.
quality of life, but life is going to
Hmm.
happen. It's indiscriminate. Like you can't, just because you're biohacking doesn't mean that life isn't going to come along and kind of make a new plan for you. So,
No, it's and they all many of them. What are they going to take over Rhode Island? I think and turn it into this state where you can live forever.
wait, you tell.
Okay,
I didn't
great.
hear this one.
Yeah, oh, it's these people for who believe that you're going to live forever. And I'll tell you a very interesting story about that. My father was a NASA engineer, and the chief scientist of NASA was a dear friend of his, and I would have lunch with him regularly to listen about what's going on. And we had lunch one time, and I said, Dennis, what are you going to blow my mind with today? And he said, I want to talk about medical care and longevity. I said, great. And he said, with synthetic biology and CRISPR technology and all of the genetic technology, we're going to be able to recreate cells indefinitely. They'll be able to grow them forever. We'll be able to recreate organs. And then with artificial implants and artificial intelligence and implantable electronics, you're going to have artificial hearts and artificial,
Singularity.
eyes and iris and artificial hearing and oh, not just a joint that is a replacement joint, but one that actually articulates based on a brain implant. And he just described all these fascinating, fabulous futures. And I said, okay, Dennis, so what you're telling me is I'm going to be a 140 to 150-year-old sack of cells surrounding a whole bunch of Alcoa and Intel products. And he said, yeah, basically. And I said, leave me the hell out. I have no interest in that future, right? And I think these discussions become even more important at that point is, all right, what's the human here?
Oh,
And where did Willie Donaldson go?
I'm gonna take privilege and take this last 5 minutes. Let's go down that rabbit hole. Because I mean, again, here we are, February of 2026, and just the news that's coming out every week with AI and the new enablements and its abilities and AI agents, and we're not far from AGI, from artificial general intelligence, and
Right.
and so what you just described, I think, is really going to be the divider. Like there is, people that are going to want to become the bionic man, $6 million man.
Right.
Bionic Woman, um, the singularity, and then there's going to be
Hmm.
the split of, I'll go back to a flip phone. I want to
Yeah.
unplug, and there's going to be, like you said, that natural. The divide is going to be a lot more poignant.
Start. Absolutely. And don't, let's go back to the discussion about not having enough saved to be able to live our lives healthy after we retire. Who's going to be able to live to 150 years old?
It's interesting,
So
to be
just
able,
leave me
yeah,
out. I'm not
quality
going,
feature.
not getting on. Yeah. No, it's funny. My students ask me all the time. They say, Dr. Donaldson, you do all this cool stuff. I still am very involved in startups and technology. And they said, do you want to go to the moon or Mars? And I'm like, no, leave me out. And one of them really asked me pointedly, well, why? And I just said, well, look, my wife and I had we're having a little problem with our toilet in town, and it's hard to get a plumber to come fix it. And I said, I'm guessing on the moon it's a bitch, right? And the supply chain's a little more extensive,
I would think that the plumber
And
that's going to the moon is like his hourly rate might be.
yeah, it might be a little higher, right? So
But
just,
it's
yeah, just
fascinating.
leave
Here we
me out.
are, like, talking
Yeah.
about, I'm trying to talk about digital legacy and, do you want to be replicated? I mean, let me ask you. Okay, so you don't want your meat sack, right? You don't want the body, to you want quality. So are you open though to uploading your digital afterlife and like creating an avatar of your likeness?
Absolutely. And here's why. And I write about it in the book, Nick, and you probably remember it. But if you go back to one of my favorite traditions as I went on my journey to learn about death traditions around the world, and I was told about an old African tradition that says that the physical death is not, that's not death. The death only really occurs when the last person on earth thinks about you and mentions your name. And if and that lit me up. It was like, okay, mom and dad are here today with
Mm.
me because I'm talking with you about them, and they will be as long as I remember them. And so, yes, a digital avatar that brings them back and introduces them to my grandchildren would be wonderful.
All right, not to get into it, but then I start questioning about, but then who owns that data to create the digital
That's
avatar?
that's back to the discussions. I think you need to write what you want to go forward. And my mother, I think she would have said not only no, but hell no. I don't want any of that stuff because she threw everything out. But some people may say, yes, please, put me up and exalt me, make me better.
Make me a
Okay, fine.
billboard.
If that's what, exactly. So I think it gets right back to the discussions of the human discussions of how long do you want to be here? What do you want? How do you want people to remember you? What do you want to be said at your funeral? Um,
And I mean, with that, so what's your plan? What, let me ask you, right? I mean, what, here you are, having gone through this with your parents, speaking to young people, knowing that we are on the precipice of a really interesting future. We're not sure which direction it's going to go in, but today, if you weren't here tomorrow, what's your plan?
in
What
terms of
documentation do
the
you have? Like, what
doc,
specific do you have?
yeah,
Do you
so
have visual
we have the
consent?
legal and the wills. I have the A&D and the do not resuscitates and all that. And my daughters have read the book and they know our feelings. So we've had those discussions. It's becoming more and more real for my wife and I. We need to have them even more so. And people can disagree, but I'm very comfortable in the fact that at some point I'm just not gonna be around, and I'm very comfortable. I do not want to be. I've written down what I don't want, and I write about it in the book. That was really powerful for my parents, so, because I think their pride, they didn't want to say, oh, we want this, we want that. So I said, okay, tell us what you don't want. Well, I don't want to be in a diaper. I don't want anybody wiping my you know what. I don't want anybody feeding me. And they just went down all the things they didn't want. I was like, okay, that informs what end of life has to look like. So let's start planning for
That
that.
scorecard.
Yeah.
Two or three takeaways our listeners can do today.
So I write about them in the book, Nikki, and that is one, don't be scared of these discussions. I think a lot of people are scared of them, and so they don't have them. But they are liberating, and they are fast. Are they hard? Yes. Are they sad? Yes. But they are incredibly powerful. So don't wait. Get started. Have the discussions. Talk early. Talk often, and then share it with everybody so that everybody knows where you're headed with this. Your doctors, your healthcare providers, your family. Everybody knows where you sit, so that they don't have to question what would mom want, what would dad want.
Do you have the document that I would think the document Allow a Natural Death? Is that a specific document, and where can people find it?
Yeah, so I can send you my version of it, and it is not a DNR has to be signed by a doctor because that is a medical directive. The others are legal documents. The A&D is really kind of a personal constitution. It just says this is the biographical and emotional things I want you to think about with me. So I'll send you my version, and feel free to share it.
Absolutely, because I would think that people just need to be documented, and more so now.
Yeah.
I think of my solo agers, right? That they don't have, and it's just going to be more important for them to put together their end of life portfolio sooner than later.
Yep.
Right? And it can change.
Yep.
You can always update it. You can change it, but it really is
That's
that.
right. Talk early, talk often, and write it down and change it. And I'll leave you with one final thought. We went out to dinner. I remember one of the last times with my mom, my brother Alec, and I, and we said, "So, anything else we need to talk about?" And she was just like, "Nope, we've said it all. You have it all. It's all documented." And getting to that point it was so profoundly rewarding.
People don't realize that. Not to be afraid.
No.
Professor Donaldson, Willy, where can people find you?
So I'm at Christopher Newport University. If you want to come see me in person, it's in Eastern Virginia. But if you go online to Estimated Time of Departure book, you'll find it there. I'm on LinkedIn. Please reach out. I'd love to help anyway. Get this topic more talked about.
Appreciate that. And with that, we'll end here. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for listening to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. I hope this conversation inspired you to take control and plan for the inevitable to protect yourself and those you leave behind. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at digitallegacypodcast.com. Remember, life is full of surprises. What happens after you die shouldn't be. So keep your passwords safe and your playbook up to date.